What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Dolphins in Depth podcast. I'm Daniel Oyefusi. Thanks so much for tuning in. And after a couple of weeks of silence from the Dolphins after the firing of Brian Flores and their search for a new head coach, the Dolphins are back in the news, but not for the right reasons. Breaking news coming Tuesday afternoon, a class action lawsuit filed by the former head coach Flores, with him listed as a plaintiff and the Dolphins, the NFL, and the other 31 teams listed as defendants. We're going to break down all angles of this breaking news. We're recording just a few hours after the release of that lawsuit and that news. But first, we're going to get right into it. I want to introduce this week's guest. I have David Wilson with me, my colleague, sports writer at the Miami Herald, who's actually with me in Mobile.
Down the hall
From the Hampton Inn. We are recording from Mobile, Alabama, where we thought that we were here to cover the 2022 Senior Bowl and the Dolphins scouting and looking at the potential additions to the team. But obviously, this breaking news takes the top spot right now. So we're gonna get right into it. Brian Flores again filed a lawsuit against the Dolphins and the NFL, alleging racial discrimination. There's a lot of layers and aspects to this lawsuit, but just kind of breaking down some key aspects of the lawsuit, which was a 58-page lawsuit filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. Flores claims in this lawsuit that his dismissal from Miami was not really because of what owner Stephen Ross claimed was collaboration and communication issues, but in fact a reluctance to tank during that 2019 NFL season, as well as an unwillingness to, quote, recruit a prominent quarterback in violation of league tampering rules. Now, obviously, you all know that 2019 NFL season was kind of viewed as the quote unquote tank season.
It was the tank season, yeah.
Yeah, in which they finished 5-11. I would say the tank wasn't really fully executed.
No,
they ended with the 5th overall pick instead of the number overall pick, and they notably selected Tua Tagovailoa. There was the tank for Tua season, but Flores is in this lawsuit saying that he was also more or less bribed by Stephen Ross to tank. According to the lawsuit, Ross offered Flores $100,000 for each loss during the 2019 season. We all know the Dolphins started off that season pretty rough, losing their first 7 games before winning 3 of their final 5 games to finish 5-11 on that season. Ryan Fitzpatrick started that season, and the team went to Josh Rosen for a couple games, but then went back to Fitzpatrick, and that kind of interrupted the tank and kind of botched the tank in some ways. And in addition to this lawsuit, it claims that Chris Greer, the general manager, actually told Brian Flores that Stephen Ross was, quote unquote, mad that Flores' success in winning games was kind of compromising the team's draft position. Just further laying out some aspects of this lawsuit, it says that in regards to this attempt to recruit a prominent quarterback after the 2019 season, according to the lawsuit, Ross pressured Flores to do so, and he refused to do so. In the winter of 2020, the lawsuit claims that Ross invited Flores to lunch on a yacht where, quote, Ross told Mr. Flores that the prominent quarterback was conveniently arriving at the marina. According to the lawsuit, Flores refused the meeting, left immediately, and was thereafter, quote unquote, treated with disdain and held out as someone who was non-compliant and difficult to work with. This is that
very
part
succession. Very succession.
That part is definitely important to note because, again, Stephen Ross said that Flores was fired because of collaboration and communication issues. And in this lawsuit, Flores is kind of pushing back on that. Now, further, adding to this lawsuit, as we all know, Brian Flores was one of the finalists and the top candidates to be the next New York Giants head coach. That job went to Brian Daboll, But in this lawsuit, Flores is claiming that the Giants had already made up their mind in wanting to hire Brian Daboll, and that his interview was solely, it was a quote unquote sham interview solely conducted to fulfill the NFL's Rooney Rule, which requires teams to interview two external minority candidates for head coaching vacancies. This lawsuit actually includes screenshots of text messages that Flores allegedly exchanged with New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick, in which Belichick prematurely congratulated Flores on getting the job when he actually meant to congratulate Dable. And according to this text message in the lawsuit, he says, "I hear from Buffalo and New York that you're the guy. Hope it works out if you wanted to." After Flores allegedly says, "Are you
We
referring
should
to
do like
me?"
a dramatic reading of this.
I got to change from my
You do
from
a
my
Belichick
voice
impression.
to
Yeah.
my but Flores later, or he allegedly later in this text message chain asked him, "Are you referring to me or are you referring to Brian Dable?" And Belichick allegedly says, "Sorry, I effed this up. I double checked and misread the text. I think they're naming Dable. I'm sorry about that." Again, if this is substantiated, corroborated, those are really damaging pieces of evidence.
Yeah, the texts are bad, and that's a paper trail there. Like that's what the crux of this whole thing is kind of basically be, right? Like
Yeah.
that's why this lawsuit exists. That is the piece of evidence they have that is pretty damning for the NFL and obviously for the Giants. And there's obviously a lot of other stuff that we're gonna all get into, but
Yeah.
that is the stuff that there's not definitive proof, because I guess it's secondhand, right? Like it's not like the Bills or the Giants accidentally texted him thinking that he was Brian Dable. It's someone
but
who
there's
heard,
the claim
right.
that the Giants disclosed to third parties that they were already
Right.
going to hire Dable. And it's crazy because it doesn't end there. Flores in the lawsuit claims that wasn't his only sham interview before. He says that in 2019, before the Dolphins hired him, he interviewed with the Denver Broncos, or quote unquote interviewed with them. In the suit, it claims that Broncos CEO Joe Ellis and then general manager John Elway looked completely quote unquote disheveled, and it was obvious that they had been drinking heavily the night before, and it was clear from the substance of the interview that Flores was only interviewed because of the room rule. That's what the lawsuit claims. So that's a breakdown more or less of this lawsuit. We have a whole story, David and I, that we wrote on the Miami Herald website, miamiherald.com. So if you want the full details past what we've kind of broken down in this podcast, you can go to miamiherald.com and read that. But this is really damning. The NFL has come out in a statement and denied the allegations, saying that they're without merit, and they've pushed back and denied them. The Dolphins have denied racial discrimination in their hiring and firing, or I guess they're firing, and as well as the allegations that they've kind of, they have, there's some claims in terms of the integrity of the game, obviously with Ross allegedly offering money to throw games. I really don't know where to go from here, what to make of this.
So there's two directions I think we can go, right? One is the racial discrimination part of it, which is like the eye pop, that's the headline, right? That's what the lawsuit is about. And it's, a lot of stuff, it's 58-page lawsuit, and a lot of the pages are just kind of documenting the history of racial discrimination or the lack of minority coaches and front office members, and the entire lack of, a big part of what the lawsuit gets into is the fact that there's no minority owners. It's kind of Flores. He's got the piece of evidence in a way that no one has had, I think, before, right? With that Belichick text. From the Dolphins' perspective, I mean, the damning stuff in there is all the
2019 season.
Stephen Ross. Yeah. It's the quarterback we'll get into. The Flores, according to the lawsuit, his hesitancy to meet with that quarterback was basically, it would have violated the league's tampering rules. He claims, I'm not as well versed probably on the league's tampering rules as you are, or obviously as Flores probably is.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, the number 2 headline out of here, the first thing, it's wild afternoon, right? We're all sitting there at Senior Bowl and watching, I can't remember
some of the top draft prospects. I believe the American team.
I think, was on the field.
We just
Jalen
finished
Colbert
the first
was
practice.
out there running routes, and kind of like all of a sudden, just like everyone you could kind of see, like, was sort of looking down at their phones and reading through this lawsuit, and we hightailed it out of there to get to work.
Yeah.
But that was kind of where I stopped at. That I think it's item number 14 in the lawsuit is the allegation that Stephen Ross was offering him $100,000 per loss. in the 2019 season. As you said, that was the tank season.
Yes.
We've written it a million times. If you go back and look at all the stuff we wrote back in 2019, it was like an open secret that Stephen Ross wanted to tank for Tua. And obviously it kind of became tank for Joe Burrow. It's coincidental, ironic, I guess, that this is coming right after the Bengals make the Super Bowl with Joe Burrow, the tank that wasn't for the Dolphins. But as I think Barry Jackson, our colleague, has always done a really good job about writing about tanking.
He wrote a recent story about just kind of how they botched the first aspect of the reboot, which was to completely tank. And Flores was kind of I mean, it's kind of weird that Flores would be like, people would be mad at Flores for winning games, but Flores was kind of looked at enemy number one in terms of didn't fulfill this tank.
Yeah, so I think the take Barry has had a lot of the time. Sorry, you're frozen. Barry has had a lot of the time is, it was never been on the players to tank. You can make a case it's on the coach to tank.
I wouldn't even say it's really on the coach.
But it's really on the GM.
It's on the front office. And in that aspect, Greer kind of fulfilled his role in terms of stripping down the roster. We've detailed, like you said, trading away Laramie Tunsil, trading away Minka Fitzpatrick, just completely like stripping the roster of its high-end talent. So in that aspect, yes, they did do its job. The front office did its job to quote unquote tank. But again, you can't tell me that when you get into the rigors of the season. I mean, it's Flores' first season.
Yeah, you can't tank.
You can't tell him to tank. Maybe Ross should have hired somebody that was on board with tanking, but I don't know how many head coaches
would be. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that there is really, I mean, again, lawyers are going to get involved. I have a master's degree in legal studies, so I guess I can comment a little bit on this. But I just from plain just knowledge, it's just interesting that, I mean, there was this open secret that they were tanking.
Right.
Now Flores is like essentially acknowledging it, but saying that Ross was kind of the leader of that. But that's a legitimate issue about the integrity of the league and an owner that would literally pay off a coach allegedly to throw games. That's not the racial discrimination aspect of it, but that's an issue in of itself. And again, it's interesting that the NFL, I'm sure they were aware of this lawsuit being filed. It's interesting that they came out and they didn't say we're going to look into this. They said it's without merit and we're going to push back on it. So that's interesting. But again, when we kind of segue into the search for a prominent, or the trying to acquire a prominent quarterback, and the pressure that Ross put on Flores to do so, that's also really interesting because we all know about this team's kind of flirtation with Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson, the reports, the rumors, the speculation of a possible trade that never came to fruition, as he kind of still deals with his own sexual assault claims and allegations and whatnot. There are some reports, I mean, I'm sure you all have seen it, there are some reports that Tom Brady was actually that quarterback. It was the winter of 2022, so after the 2020. Oh, excuse me, the 2020 season, that this attempted meeting took place. And again, if you all don't remember, Tom Brady was just finishing up I guess his final season as a New England Patriot, and he was set to be a Patriot in March of 20, I guess that'd be 2021 or so.
Right.
So again, we haven't at the Herald officially corroborated those reports, but there are most reports that it was Tom Brady, not Deshaun Watson. In terms of the timeline, that would tend to add up. Yeah, but I think that's also, it's just really interesting how we have these kind of narratives and these reports about Ross and maybe his infatuation with Deshaun Watson at one time, kind of pushing his agenda on the team's top decision makers. This is all allegations, it's all in a lawsuit, but it's just kind of crazy how some of this stuff all comes together. But potentially, I do find that really interesting, because the lawsuit says that after Flores refused to kind of, to participate in this meeting, he was, kind of relegated as, the guy that's hard to work with. And it is notable that after his dismissal from the Dolphins, there were a lot of more reports about him just his personality just not endearing itself to people in the facility and in places of power and throughout the Dolphins organization. I feel like two things can be true. Again, these are lawsuits, these are allegations. Two things can be true, that maybe Flores didn't endear himself, his personality, to other people in the facility, but maybe he also didn't want to take part in what he viewed as tampering. Again, these are allegations. We can't say for sure whether that did or did not. But again, he's saying that this all played a role in this kind of narrative and this perception that he was hard to work with. And as we kind of lean into the racial discrimination part, he said that it kind of played a role in this kind of angry black man stigma that he believes was placed on him, in kind of the defamation of his name and his character after he was let go from the Dolphins. So again, that kind of leads us into the back to the Giants aspect to this, where he believes, or he claims, that they were sham interviews with the Giants. I think that we can all say that the NFL still has a long way to go in its hiring practice, and particularly diverse hiring practices. Flores, we all know, he did get that job in Miami. He was let go. He's not only interviewed with the New York Giants, but the Chicago Bears, the Houston Texans. He's reportedly set to interview with the New Orleans Saints. But he's claiming that, again, this was a sham interview, and that the Rooney Rule was only, in name only, it was kind of fulfilled.
Yeah.
And he, again, as you mentioned, he points to the fact that, there is only one current black head coach in the NFL, that being the Steelers, Mike Tomlin. David Culley, we know, was fired from the Texans after 1 year, and him kind of getting a raw deal there. So again, this isn't really just about him. This is about big picture, trying to change the NFL's practices of hiring diverse candidates in positions of power. It really isn't just about him. He's actually supposed to speak on CBS's broadcast, or their I think it's CBS This Morning at 7 a.m. Eastern time. I'm sure by the time the podcast comes out, that probably would have already happened. But this really is, a lot of people have compared it to kind of a Colin Kaepernick situation, where you're kind of taking the fall for a bigger cause. And he actually mentions that in a statement that he released. He said, "God has gifted me with a special talent to coach the game of football, but the need for change is bigger than my personal goals. In making the decision to file this class action complaint, I understand that I may be risking coaching the game I love." So it's definitely bigger than him and what he's trying to bring to light, and change. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, again, there's going to be lawyers involved. This is going to be a long, drawn out process. And the Dolphins are right in the middle of this.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting a coaching hire this week necessarily for the Dolphins after all of this. But yeah, I mean, I want to go back to the quarterback thing, the Brady speculation, which makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking, I remembered I had totally forgotten about this, but ahead of the Super Bowl in 2020, I covered like a Bloomberg event that Ross spoke at. Mm-hmm. And I forgot he got asked about Tom Brady at that meeting, and that was January 2020, which obviously is the winter of 2020. And so I was trying to find it, I pulled it up, and his quote from that event was basically like, why would Tom Brady want to come? They knew they were in the middle of a rebuild. Yeah, basically. Let me find the quote here. He said, "I heard he's going to be a free agent, but we're not allowed to talk to him until sometime in March. And we're a team now that's building. I don't really know why he'd want to come to the Dolphins." So, we were actually just talking the other day about Stephen Ross is kind of sometimes honest to a fault. Who knows what's happening there? But that's those Brady rumors were real, so it's not surprising that he was the guy. And I have a lot of sympathy with Flores and the not wanting to tank. Like, I totally get it. You can't do that. And if that stuff is proven to be true, like, Stephen Ross won't be the owner of the team anymore. Like, that is it's obviously there's been a lot of implied tanking over the years, but actually bribing your coach to throw games is literally what he was doing, basically, if the allegations are true. I mean, that obviously just is it's not something the NFL is going to allow. if I was Brian Flores, would I have taken the meeting with Tom Brady in January of 2020, even if it technically violated the league's tampering rules? Yeah, I probably would have. But I mean, yeah, it's interesting. The what was the phrase? What's the line we keep saying? Collaborative and communicative.
Yeah, communication and collaboration. I
and
remember
that was
that's
what
Stephen
that
Ross
was.
said.
And that's what they basically accused Brian Flores of not being. And in a way, that stuff all proves that like
Yeah, maybe he wasn't
maybe lying about that.
Maybe he didn't want to communicate and collaborate and turn on some stuff that he thought was ethically right. Just not right. Possibly.
Yeah, so it actually backs up a lot of what why the Dolphins fired him. Now the question is, like, they were firing him basically according to this lawsuit because he wouldn't break the rules, essentially. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to continue to talk about this breaking news. Brian Flores filing a lawsuit against the Dolphins and the NFL alleging racial discrimination. We're going to talk more about what that means for the Dolphins, Stephen Ross, as well as kind of their search for their next head coach, which is obviously been put on the.
That's what we thought we were going to talk about this week.
Well, yeah,
we thought we were going to talk about that and Daniel Falele.
Yeah, exactly. But now it's turned to Brian Flores. So stick with us, stay locked with us, and we're going to talk about that on the other end of things. What's going on, everybody? We're still here with David Wilson at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. But we're not talking Senior Bowl on this podcast. We're talking breaking news, which is Brian Flores flying the ex-Dolphins head coach filing a class action lawsuit against the Dolphins, the NFL, and the other 31 franchises alleging racial discrimination. Now, I know in the first half of this pod, we talked about just really detailing the entire lawsuit and kind of some context around that. And in the second half, I want to kind of get a little deeper into what's next. Now, obviously, it looks like the NFL and its teams are pushing back wholeheartedly on these claims. The Dolphins have pushed back. The Giants have pushed back. The NFL has pushed back. I know I just saw that the Broncos released a statement. I'm sure they've pushed back there. Again, I think that this is really, I mean, I don't want to jump the gun, but this might be a landmark case for, in terms of, kind of sports in the NFL, because it really is not just about Flores, but him attacking the NFL's whole process of hiring and firing minority coaches. Again, he said in a statement that he thinks that, his coaching of the game of football is it's not as big as kind of affecting change. And I just kind of scrolling through Twitter, looking at everyone's responses. One thing that really stood out to me is that this really does, to me, mirror the Colin Kaepernick case, because again, I'm going to put on my Master's of Legal Studies hat and kind of just give my armchair analysis. There have been a number of cases regarding racial discrimination, especially, with lawsuits filed by coaches, whether that's been the hiring, their firing, or even the adequate pay, and just claims that they haven't been paid, or they've been paid at a disparate, rate because of their race. And there's been some successful cases, there's been some unsuccessful cases. But when I kind of compare this to Colin Kaepernick, I think we have a situation where that screenshot from Bill Belichick was just the tip of the iceberg. And you have a situation where you could get a lot of people subpoenaed. You have the discovery phase of the trial or a case where, again, I think that Bill Belichick text is just the tip of the iceberg, because, again, they're claiming that the Giants disclosed to third parties that they were going to hire Brian Daboll before they even conducted the interview with Brian Flores. So the Giants are involved in this. There's potential that the Giants could be, their records and text messages and phone calls or whatever could be, subpoenaed and pulled into discovery. We have the Denver Broncos, who in 2019 allegedly did a sham interview I mean, even the Dolphins, from which this doesn't really play as much into the racial discrimination aspect, but just the fact that there was allegedly, a payout, or there was supposed to be a payout if when Flores lost games. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could start to come out.
You think he accepted the mill? It sounds like he turned it down.
Yeah, I mean, if you accept,
1.1 million is what he should have gotten for losing.
If you accepted the money, if you accepted the money, I'm not sure he would have been following suit with this lawsuit. So I'm gonna assume he didn't accept it, because then he's kind of putting himself out there. But again, if there was any type of paper trail there, where Ross maybe indicated to him through text or whatever, again, a lot of stuff could come out. And when you look at the Colin Kaepernick situation, where he sued that the NFL and his franchises were blackballing him from playing after protesting racial inequality in America, we never got to discovery phase, really, where a lot of text messages and stuff came out. And that was really kind of the fear that people thought the NFL would have. Like, we don't want all of our dirty laundry coming out. And eventually that case was settled.
Right. It's kind of like what happened with the Gruden thing, right? Where it's part of this other, like the NFL really has tried to make sure more leak. That was out of the WFT case, right? Like, teams have really tried.
Correct.
The league has really tried to make sure more of that doesn't come out, basically. And what did was really, really damning.
Yeah.
And not necessarily for the team they were investigating.
Again, so I'm just kind of looking ahead, and I'm saying, in terms of Flores' ability to win this lawsuit, he didn't specify like exact. He's suing for damages, like unspecified damages that I guess the court would decide, as well as wanting to impact some changes to the NFL's hiring process, firing process, and whatnot, to try to ensure more diversity. I'm not sure if he's going to win in all aspects of like the racial discrimination suit, because unless there's a clear paper trail where the Giants were like, yes, we're going to hire Brian Daboll, and before they interviewed Brian Flores, unless there's like that clear cut evidence, I'm not sure if he'll really win that racial discrimination lawsuit. Because in a lot of these cases, just from my experience of reading them, like you have to prove that you're in your individual case that there was like direct attempt to not fulfill like the Rooney Rule, like you were just doing it just because you already had your main mind up. Like that has to be like in a writing. Yeah, I don't know in a court of law if they're gonna kind of like connect two and two and just to say, okay, we're gonna assume that's the case. I think you have to have the clear evidence right there that they wanted to hire this white coach instead of this black coach. But again, I think big picture, you could see a situation where maybe Flores doesn't win all aspects of this suit, but the NFL is so caught up in this situation that it's just another stain on the shield, and they have no choice but to take some more steps. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this lawsuit is not going anywhere. And this is really gonna take a top precedent for the Senior Bowl where we're at.
Definitely.
We're definitely gonna continue to cover this lawsuit and what comes out of it. What are your thoughts?
So a couple of things. One, as you mentioned, like the tanking and the tampering stuff. Like that's stuff that's ultimately probably not. I mean, you're the legal expert here, but it seems like that's stuff that's like not going to come up in whenever this like hits court, right? That's something the NFL has to figure out by itself. Ultimately it paints a bad picture of the Dolphins, but it's not like they didn't break any laws. They broke NFL rules potentially, but didn't break any laws. Unless they're throwing games could be like. Because of gambling.
I think that definitely. The NFL is like a private entity, so I think that would. I think that the tanking aspect of it and his reluctance to do that, and how he alleges the organization and treated him afterward, he thinks that all played a role in kind of this like quote, like again, the lawsuit says this angry black man stigma that he says that a lot of black men face. And that's all kind of tying into what he views as racial.
Right. He's painting this one big picture. Right. Exactly. A couple other things that were interesting to me. Charles Robinson from Yahoo reported a couple hours ago They've spoken to 2 coaches who believe they have the receipts to be part of the class action lawsuit. So, like you said, there's going to be more of this.
Yes.
The other interesting thing is like I said, the text messages with Belichick are ultimately hearsay, but like they're going to ask Bill Belichick.
But again, that's I believe that's the only piece of like actual evidence that was
but they're
put
gonna
in
ask,
this lawsuit.
Like, they're going to ask Bill Belichick to testify if this gets to the courtroom, right?
Exactly.
And they have to know how he figured that out.
Yep.
Brian, I don't know Brian Dable at all. He's an offensive coordinator. Like he's not.
But he said he heard from people in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And
but is Brian Dable going to be asked to testify? And
possibly
I don't know. Would he tell whatever happened? Like, or is he gonna? He's worked for the Giants now. Is he gonna just kind of plead the fifth and sit back? Or if there was some wrongdoing, is he gonna help expose it? There's a lot of elements that are still out there. And like I said, the text messages are that broke the seal basically.
Because that was only
you needed that one piece of evidence.
That was a very, very
it's
hard
the most
piece of evidence.
I think everyone with like a sense of how the world works and how the NFL works knows that there are sham interviews basically for Rooney Rule candidates, right? Like the league requires you to interview 2 minority candidates for every head coach.
An external, job. Yeah. I mean, there's been an update to the Rooney Rule where prior it was just you had to interview 1 minority candidate, and a lot of teams were just kind of getting the random running backs coach.
Yeah, exactly.
Team. And I think was it Deuce Staley who was
Deuce Staley at the Eagles. Yeah,
exactly. So
so I think you see. Yeah, so like I think and it doesn't just apply to the NFL situation, but when people do job interviews, you interview more people than like you're probably really considering. Maybe one of those guys is going to blow you away, but the NFL for a long time, like you just look at the numbers, they haven't taken black candidates seriously. There's a lot of bad white coaches around. There's not usually a lot of bad black coaches. Like if they're bad, they're done.
Yeah, and in that lawsuit, Flores, he pointed to that. He pointed. I'm trying to think the Arizona Cardinals former head coach. Who he said, I think was it not Wilkes, he's the general manager, but I have to check, but he just pointed to the fact that prior to Cliff Kingsbury, the Arizona Cardinals head coach had 1 season with Josh Rosen.
Yeah, Wilkes.
Yeah, okay. Is it Steve Wilkes?
Steve Wilkes, yeah.
Steve Wilkes had 1 season in Arizona with Josh Rosen.
Yeah, David Culley, obviously,
he was fired
this year. Yeah, David Culley had the same thing in Houston this last year. Overachieved, I think, by most people's standards. Or expectations.
I mean, he won 5 games or so. Exactly. A roster that was just as bad as that Flores roster.
Yeah, it was really a pretty similar situation. I mean, Flores obviously, I think, overachieved for 2 years, but maybe underachieved a little bit this year. But had the first back-to-back winning seasons for the Dolphins in almost 20 years. It's like whenever you say like there's Mike Tomlin, but like Mike Tomlin's one of the 5 best coaches in the league. So like that's the standard that the NFL has set. So again, like they got a lot that they're going to have to prove if he's going to win this lawsuit. But again, I'm sure Brian Flores, like when he files this lawsuit, he's hoping he's going to win. But I think, I
think he kind of sees the bigger picture in that.
Again, it's interesting. Like you said, the unspecified damages are part of what the lawsuit actually is, but he's also seeking some changes to the hiring process.
Yeah. And I don't know
some of those.
Yeah.
Like, can the federal
court
enforce that? But
I'm
like
not sure.
NFL, if you do this, like that's a great step is kind of what he's saying.
I mean, obviously this is a complaint, and there's different aspects of the complaint. I think that part of that was kind of the show in a sense to say, hey, I'm seeking these damages, maybe some monetary compensation, but also, again, I'm looking bigger picture. And while a court might not do this, I want to bring the light that these issues, these certain measures should be implemented. One thing I'll say is, I think that while the NFL has, again, denied the claims and said that they were without merit, it doesn't help the NFL's case that there's only 1 black head coach in the NFL, Tomlin. And out of the 9 coaching vacancies this cycle,
and 1 Hispanic head coach, we should say that 1 Hispanic coach too.
Correct. And then I think I guess
I feel bad that Ron Rivera kind of gets lumped in with the bland wall of white guys.
Yeah, exactly. but I think a lot.
Yes, but that same point.
Yeah, exactly. For this situation. It's the fact that, again, when 70% of the league is black,
Yeah.
only one of those 32 coaching jobs is filled by a black man. That's the real root of the issue right there.
Yeah.
It doesn't help the NFL's case that 4 of the league's 9 coaching vacancies have been filled by white men. With the Rooney Rule saying each of these 9 teams have to interview 2 black candidates. So far, almost half of those openings have been filled. No black coaches, no diversity.
And really, the only black coach who, Mike McDaniel is biracial, but other than that, the only Leslie Frazier, I guess, has been candidate for some of these jobs.
D'Amico Ryans was
those guys have never felt like they're these guys haven't been reported as front runners for any of these jobs.
Exactly.
Right?
So it really, the NFL, I mean, again, the NFL is going to say what they have to say, what they want to say, but it doesn't help their cause that, Flores is pretty much saying that there's continued issues and inequalities, inequities with the hiring process, the firing process, and the NFL can't even point to the product and say, oh, well, they can't even point to the product and say that's this is kind of unsubstantiated. Obviously, this whole lawsuit kind of clouds over the Dolphins' current pursuit of a head coach. While Flores wasn't claiming any issues with this hiring, it was more about his firing. It does, again, cast a cloud over the Dolphins' coaching search. I mean, we were gonna kind of talk about this to begin the show until this news came out, but there were some reports on Monday that the Dolphins had interviewed San Francisco 49ers offensive coordinator Mike McDaniel a second time for their opening. Those reports were not corroborated. They were actually untrue. The Dolphins have yet to speak with McDaniel again. 49ers coach Kyle Shanahan actually told reporters Tuesday that McDaniel was going to speak with the Dolphins on Thursday. A source told me that Chris Greer is actually in Mobile right now for the Senior Bowl. So obviously the attention.
And Brian Flores in Mobile.
Yeah, Brian Flores is as well.
I was supposed to interview with the Saints on Thursday, right? Was the report?
Wednesday or Thursday? But yeah,
who knows if that's.
I was actually told that he was on somebody's flight to Mobile. So there's a lot of moving parts here. We kind of joked about it earlier. I guess it was yesterday that that would really suck if the Dolphins announced a hiring of a coach while we're in Mobile.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen right now. Obviously they're going to continue to do their work in terms of scouting at the Senior Bowl and looking for a coach. But it definitely seems like a really bad time if you want to announce that. Again, I think that the Dolphins still have to kind of do what they do and kind of keep it business as usual as they attend to what will develop with this lawsuit. But I'd be surprised if there was a announcement at least this week. I think they might kind of hold off in terms of the PR look of it and all.
Well, we got to see what the NFL, like you said, right away was just no merit to this, but I don't know if they're not looking into some of this stuff specifically. Like I said, it's racial discrimination, the racial discrimination aspect of it, that'll be the courts. But like I said, the couple of things that are violation of league rules,
you would think that
they're just not going to look into the tampering, or they're just not going to look into the allegations of throwing games.
I mean, this wasn't
that stuff that would affect Stephen Ross. Like I said, if that stuff is true, he can't be the owner anymore. Not necessarily the tampering. The tampering would be you lose draft pick probably, but
in terms of offering to pay a coach to
throw games, that would be, he would not be the owner anymore. That's it's like Pete Rose, right? Can't gamble on baseball. You can't throw games. Or Shoeless Joe Jackson, right? It's been the one rule in sports for 100 years.
Yeah, you can't pay or implicate yourself in paying to kind of sway games. The one thing I will say about the NFL, and I'm not defending the NFL at all. I mean, I'm going to be the last person to defend the NFL. But the one thing I'll say is this is a lawsuit. It's different when it'd be different if there were just reports of this coming out and the NFL could say, we're looking into this. With the NFL coming out so quickly to deny it, it's obvious that this was brought to their attention. They were aware that this was going to be filed. They may have done some due diligence into looking it up. I'm not sure, but they were definitely clear of this. I mean, I don't think the NFL is irresponsible enough to completely deny reports that they're not aware about as soon as they come out. So NFL was aware of this, and now that it's a lawsuit and they've kind of had the time to be informed about this, I think that's why you see the denial. But again, when you talk about potential tampering, potential influence of games or paying to any type of insinuation that you're paying because of the outcome of a game, the NFL has to look into that despite whatever denial that they may have.
Right.
And it's going to be interesting to see how much the NFL talks, how much they respond, how much the Dolphins may respond to any of this. I mean, again, we haven't spoken to anybody, any top Dolphins officials publicly in a news conference setting since the team fired Flores. The last person to speak was Stephen Ross.
Yeah.
We have not heard from Chris Greer since the season ended. I don't anticipate we're going to hear from them maybe until we hear about a new coach being hired. But again, there's going to be, I mean, I'll tell you what, the first news conference with Chris Greer, there's going to be a lot of tough questions and a lot of hard questions. And not only about Flores' time, and how it ended, but just the overall tenure, and just how they went about that 2019 season and whatnot. So I mean, one thing we've been joking about it really since I joined this beat, but this team keeps things interesting.
They do. They keep things interesting.
Yeah, they might not.
They're perfect Miami team. They're just like it's always something.
No, most definitely. Well, that actually brings us to the end of another edition of the Dolphins in Depth podcast.
You don't want to talk about Daniel Falele?
Man, as much as I love 6'9", 380-pound lineman who can move and block,
can he coach?
Man, he might have to at this rate. As much as I'd love to talk about that, we might have to shelf that for another week. Again, breaking news: Brian Flores, ex-Dolphins coach, filing a lawsuit against the Dolphins and the NFL alleging racial discrimination. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, we have already a bunch of stories detailing it and the various angles at Miami Herald, MiamiHerald.com. And I'm sure next week we'll have a lot more to discuss regarding that. But until then, I can't say enjoy the week. I mean, I know the Super Bowl is this week. I'm not sure how much Dolphins will be able to enjoy it between Joe Burrow playing and this Dolphins news. But we'll be back next week. To discuss the latest developments with that.
It's going to be the main. It's going to be a big talking point at the Super Bowl next week when all these coaches and players are being interviewed. And, tomorrow morning, I guess we'll get to talk to Dan Campbell and Robert Saleh. They're going to be asked about it. So
there's
going to be a lot of this over the next week or two. And
most definitely
the whole off season, probably.
Most definitely. I mean, this lobby into lawsuit. So this could stretch for several months, potentially years. I mean, I just speculating. But again, at the Miami Herald, we'll have it covered from all various angles. So thank you for tuning in. You guys enjoy the week, and we'll be back next week to talk Dolphins. Take care.